My own son walked me to the edge of the ridge, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Then, without a word, he shoved me off the cliff. As the wind roared past my ears, I whispered to myself, "Pretend I'm dead." He thought it was over. He thought I was gone for good. But beneath the silence, I was already planning my return, collecting proof, guarding every secret, waiting for the moment to strike back. And when the truth finally reached the courtroom, it wasn't just my life on trial, it was his. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far this tale of betrayal has traveled. The air was cool and sharp that evening, the kind of mountain breeze that always reminded me why I stayed in Asheville all these years. The Blue Ridge ridges stretched out like old friends, their quiet presence steadying, even when my own family wasn't. Feet crunched against the gravel path near the ridge as twilight deepened, and for a moment there was peace in just hearing the leaves rustle. But silence inside my own house wasn't peace. It was distance. Lately, Travis had moved about like I was nothing more than a ghost in his way. He'd avoid my eyes at breakfast, keep his voice clipped when I asked simple questions. Darlene stayed by his side, polite but cold, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. I'd lived long enough to know when a storm was brewing, and this one was rolling in under my own roof. At dinner that night, the tension thickened like smoke. The roast chicken sat steaming on the table, untouched. I tried to talk about the old oak tree out back, how it needed trimming before the winter storms. "Dad," Travis said, cutting me off, "you don't need to worry about those things anymore. Your time of deciding things around here, it's over." His words landed like a slap, though he never raised a hand. Marlene reached for my arm, her fingers a soft anchor. "Don't start tonight," she whispered, trying to cool the heat in her son's voice, but nothing could hide the contempt dripping from him. He looked at me as if I were a burden, an obstacle to be moved aside. I kept my voice steady, but inside, something cracked. Every mortgage I paid, every debt I covered, every sacrifice to give him a chance in this world, it all collapsed into that single sentence. "It's over." After dinner, I needed the air more than ever. The house had grown too heavy, every corner filled with unspoken resentment. "Walk with me," I said to Travis. He hesitated, then nodded, his jaw set tight. Together, we stepped out under the fading light, heading toward the ridge. The silence between us was heavier than any words. Gravel shifted under our boots as we moved closer to the cliff's edge. He walked half a step behind me, and I could feel his eyes on my back. When his hand landed on my shoulder, the grip was firm, too firm. My gut tightened, instincts honed over years warning me, but I kept walking, pretending not to notice. Sometimes silence says more than 1,000 questions. Then it came. A sudden shove. My feet left solid ground, and the world tilted into nothingness. The wind roared past my ears as I tumbled downward. In that instant, flashes of Travis's childhood tore through my mind. His first car, the tuition I worked 2 jobs to cover, the nights I went without so he could have enough. And this was my thanks. This was the hand my son gave back to me. The jagged rocks blurred past, water below rushing up like a black mirror. My lips barely moved, but the words slipped out, a whisper meant for no one but myself. "Pretend I'm dead." Cold water swallowed me whole. My body smacked against it, pain tearing through my chest. Darkness closed in fast, but not fast enough to drown the thought that pulsed through me. If I survived, no one could know. Silence would be my weapon. The current dragged me under, limbs numb, mind fading. My last conscious thought clung to me like a vow. This isn't the end. Not yet. The first thing that reached me wasn't sight, but sound, a low, steady hum of machines, broken by the occasional shuffle of shoes in the hallway. My chest rose and fell with effort, each breath dragging like a weight. The air was thick with the antiseptic sting of disinfectant. My body felt foreign, heavy, like it belonged to someone else. Then came the voices, faint at first, then sharper, more distinct. "You need to stop worrying." "The old man's out of the picture." Travis's tone was casual, dismissive. "Once the paperwork clears, It's ours. A chill ran deeper than the IV line in my arm. Darlene's voice followed, colder than the mountain air that had rushed past me during that fall. I told you this would work. We can sell the land. The house, it'll be a fresh start for us. Every word pressed against my chest harder than the oxygen tube. My son and his wife weren't grieving outside my room. They were plotting, already slicing up the life I had built piece by piece. The push from the cliff hadn't been a burst of anger. It was planned. My trust, my sacrifices, all calculated against me. I forced myself into stillness, willing my eyelids to remain closed. Let them think I was gone. If they believed that, then silence would be the only weapon I had left. The door creaked open. I kept my breathing slow, uneven, as though still lost in unconsciousness. A hand checked my pulse. Gentle, practiced. When it withdrew, I felt something slip into my palm. Folded paper. Discreet. Deliberate. Minutes later, when the door shut again, I dared to curl my fingers. The words were simple, written in hurried ink. I heard them too. Don't trust them. Celeste Rourke, the nurse with kind eyes I had noticed briefly through the haze of pain. She knew, and more importantly, she was risking herself to warn me, for the first time since the cliff. A thread of hope pierced through the fog. The rhythm of my heart betrayed me, quickening as the door opened again. Footsteps heavier this time. Travis, his voice shifted into a tone so sweet it nearly made me sick. Dad, you're gonna be all right. Doctor says you're a fighter. I kept my face slack, my body still. The performance was meant for the doctor, but the venom underneath was meant for me. I could feel it. When the doctor left, Travis lingered. He leaned down close, his breath warm and sour against my cheek. If you wake, he whispered, you'll regret it. The words pierced deeper than the fall itself. My hand tightened around Celeste's note until the edges pressed into my skin. Anger burned, but I swallowed it. Silence was survival, and one day, silence would become retribution. The machines beeped steadily beside me, each sound a reminder that I was still here, still breathing. My thoughts drifted back, unbidden, to moments I had ignored. Small betrayals, quiet dismissals, cracks that had been forming for years. The cliff had only made visible what had been eroding in silence all along, lying there in the dim hospital light. I promised myself I would wait, I would watch, and when the time was right, they would know the weight of a father's silence turned into truth. The hospital room stayed dim through the night, machines humming steadily in the background. Lying there, the weight of exhaustion pressed down, but rest never truly came. Each time the door creaked open, lids slid shut, pretending to drift in healing sleep. Behind those closed eyes, fragments of whispered words kept circling. Travis's voice, Darlene's tone. They had spoken as though life had already left the body in this bed. The silence of the late hours carved a hollow space inside. Thoughts replayed again and again, each sharper than the last. That push at the cliff had not been born in a single moment of rage. It was the echo of something much older, seeded years back, watered by arrogance and neglect. The betrayal had roots. Memory pulled me backward, to a time when Travis was still in his 20s. He stood taller than me already, chest puffed with youthful confidence. But there was something in his eyes that day, something dismissive. We had been sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out, when I tried to guide him. Save first, spend second, I had said, showing him how to balance what little he earned. He leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips. Dad, no one does it that way anymore. Your time is past. The words stung, not because they were loud, but because he let a couple of his friends hear them. Their laughter, casual and careless, burned hotter than any shout. That was the first cut. Small, perhaps, but deep enough to draw blood inside. The memory replayed vividly now, as if the hospital walls had turned into that kitchen again. Another memory surfaced uninvited. Marlene, steady as always, had pleaded softly. Sign over part of the land. Lamar. It will help him settle. Show him you trust him. Her eyes had carried hope and love for her son. Reluctantly, I had signed, my pen dragging heavy across the paper. Days later, I overheard Travis boasting to friends that the land was always mine anyway. Dad just made it official. He hadn't seen me standing at the doorway then. Or maybe he had, and didn't care. That was more than a cut. It was an erasure, a piece of dignity stripped quietly away while the world applauded his gain. That memory hit hardest here in the hospital, lying in a bed that felt more like a cell. The push off the cliff was not a single act of violence. It was a conclusion, a full stop written after decades of contempt. Breath steadied as the memories faded back into the present. The ceiling above looked cold, but inside, something sparked. This life would not end as a victim's story. Whatever time remained, dignity would be reclaimed. No longer would silence be only armor. It would become a strategy. Then came the faintest sound outside the door. A young voice, unsure but full of warmth, asked, "Is my granddad in here?" Gideon. My grandson. The syllables of his name broke through the weight pressing on my chest. Hope crept in with the sound of his curiosity. Fear followed just as quickly. Travis would never want Gideon to see me like this, awake and breathing. My body tensed, bracing for the possibility that his voice would be turned away. His footsteps sent back down the hall. A whisper escaped my lips, soft enough for only me to hear. If Gideon finds me, I still have a reason to fight. The quiet hum of the machines around me was broken by a softer sound, the shuffle of sneakers against tile. My eyelids fluttered open just enough to see a thin figure slipping past the door. It was Gideon. His shoulders hunched forward as though he was carrying a weight far too heavy for someone his age. Seeing him there, in defiance of every obstacle, sent a warmth through me I hadn't felt since before the cliff. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice breaking like a boy's but determined like a man's. The lump in my throat nearly stopped me from answering, but I forced the words out. "You found me." Tears gathered in his eyes. He leaned closer. "I had to. They think you're gone." His tone shook with disbelief. "I heard them fighting. Grandpa, Dad, and Mom. They said once the final papers are signed, everything would be theirs. They weren't worried about you coming back." His words burned hotter than the pain in my body. To hear my own flesh and blood speak of me as though I were already buried. It confirmed what my bones already knew. Travis's shove wasn't a moment of rage. It was a plan, a cold decision dressed in family duty. I pulled Gideon closer, my voice low, almost a growl. "Say nothing for now. Pretend you know nothing. That's how we'll stay ahead." He nodded, lips pressed tight. For the first time in days, I saw myself reflected in his courage. Later that night, the phone by my bed rang quietly. I answered, my voice hoarse. On the other end came a familiar drawl. "Lamar, it's Victor." Victor Pelfrey had lived 2 doors down for 20 years. He knew every creak of my porch, every tire track on the gravel. His tone was hushed, conspiratorial. "I saw Travis last night. He was at your house, pulling boxes out, loading them in his truck. Looked like he was cleaning the place out." The sting behind my eyes turned sharp. My home wasn't just wood and nails. It was my blood written into every board. Marlene's laughter soaked into every wall. And now Travis was hauling it away like old garbage. "Thank you, Victor," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "Keep your eyes open. Don't let him know you called." I hung up and sat back, my chest heavy but steady. Pieces of a plan began forming. The next day, I asked Gideon to tuck Celeste's note into the lining of his backpack. "Keep it safe," I told him. "One day, it will matter more than you know." He nodded solemnly, treating the slip of paper like a relic. When Travis walked into the room later, Darlene at his side, I did what I hadn't done since that night on the cliff. I opened my eyes. "Dad!" Travis exclaimed, his voice too bright, too polished. "You're awake, thank God." I studied his face, every twitch and flicker. "I remember more than you think," I said, my voice even, deliberate. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back in place. That's good. That's real good. But the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. Darlene touched his arm, trying to cover the crack, but I had seen it. The first dent in their armor. When they finally left, Gideon slipped back to my side. I drew him close, my voice barely a whisper. This war is not just about property, son. It's about dignity. His young eyes met mine with fire. For the first time, I believed I wasn't alone in this fight. The night stretched long, heavy with silence. But inside me a new strength stirred. The time for hiding was fading. The first warning had been given. The next step would demand more than silence. It would demand defiance. The hum of machines in the hospital room had become a rhythm, steady but suffocating. A week had passed since the fall, each day marked by whispers, staged smiles, and the weight of secrets pressing down. Silence had been my shield, but it was no longer enough. Gideon's warning, Victor's suspicions, they confirmed what my gut had already known. My son wasn't slowing down. He was accelerating, determined to bury me both in memory and in paperwork. The decision settled over me like a stone. If I wanted to survive, not just in body, but in name and dignity, I had to act. Celeste, the nurse with careful eyes and steady hands, caught my glance when she came in to check the IV. Her presence had become more than professional. It was protective. I murmured just one word. Phone. She didn't ask why. Minutes later, she slipped the receiver into my hand and left the room, the door clicking shut behind her. My voice trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of speaking against the heaviness in my chest. Conrad, I whispered when he answered, the familiar tone of my lawyer. Conrad Vale steadied me. I need you. It's urgent. Travis is moving against me. Come quietly. Don't let them see you. That call was the first crack in the silence I'd built, and once it broke, there was no going back. The next morning, sunlight cut across the sterile room, and with it came Travis. He strode in with practiced ease, carrying a bouquet of cheap flowers, plastering a smile as if rehearsed in the mirror. Nurses nearby saw only a caring son visiting his fragile father. They didn't hear the strain in his greeting, the hiss of contempt beneath the honeyed words. He leaned closer, his smile taut. Dad, you've given us quite a scare. I straightened slightly, ignoring the tug of pain in my side. I know what you're doing, I said, my voice even. The land, the house, they're not yours. They never were. For a moment, his mask slipped. The flowers trembled in his grip. His eyes narrowed, sharp as broken glass, before he quickly blinked and forced the grin back. You must still be confused from the fall. Don't strain yourself. But I had seen it, the flicker of fear, and he knew I had seen it too. Conrad came later, slipping in after visiting hours under the guise of a late-night consult. His presence filled the room with a different kind of gravity. He listened as I recounted the fall, the whispers, the note Celeste had placed in my hand. He didn't interrupt. His silence carved from years of hearing half-truths and full betrayals in courtrooms. Finally, he exhaled. Lamar, the situation is worse than you think. Papers have already been filed. Property transfer. I've checked. Your signature's on them. The words hit like another shove off that cliff. My signature? I hadn't signed a damn thing. They forged it, Conrad continued, his jaw tight. If we can prove it, it's fraud, but they've already moved to push it through. Rage didn't come with fire. It came cold, like ice spreading in my veins. Then we fight, I said. We fight fire with fire. Later, Marlene came, her presence, once comfort, now carried a tremor of desperation. She stood by the bed, wringing her hands. Lamar, please. He's our son. Can't we just let this go? Maybe sign something. Give him part of what he wants. I can't bear to watch the family fall apart. Her eyes glistened with tears, but mine stayed dry. And the years had already wrung me of that. This isn't about money, Marlene, I said quietly. It's about dignity, about my name. If he takes that, then I am nothing, and I will not leave this world as nothing." Her sobs filled the silence, but I didn't bend. Too much had already been broken. The storm broke the next day. Travis returned, mask already fraying, temper coiled tight. He leaned in, hissing words meant only for me. "You should have stayed dead." I gripped the rail of the bed, steel biting into my palm. My voice came out steady, a whisper sharp as a blade. "Now the war begins." Conrad came back 2 days later, his expression heavy, carrying a folder that seemed to weigh more than paper should. He closed the hospital door behind him and pulled a chair close to my bed. His voice dropped low, meant only for my ears. "Lamar, it's worse than we thought." My chest tightened. He spread out the documents, bank statements, property transfers, and pages with my own signature scrawled across them. Only they weren't mine. The loops were wrong, the strokes too stiff. "Your son not only forged your name," Conrad explained, tapping the papers, "but he bribed a bank employee, Howard Lisk, to push everything through fast. Money exchanged hands. Approvals that should have taken weeks cleared in days." The fury rising in me was almost too much to hold. Betrayal had a face now, not just Travis's, but the men he dragged into this. Yet beneath the anger was a sharp clarity. I had been right to stay vigilant. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Conrad leaned back, watching me absorb it all. "We can act, but you need to understand, this won't just be a legal dispute. It'll tear the family apart." I met his gaze. He already tried to erase me with one shove. "He won't erase my name on paper." Gideon, sitting quietly near the window, shifted in his chair. I thought he hadn't been listening, but his young voice came steady. "Grandpa, whatever you do, I'll be with you." His words carried more strength than any contract. Conrad gave a slow nod, as though he'd expected nothing less. The next day, the storm walked through the hospital door. Travis entered, his steps quick, his jaw tight. He carried himself with that false warmth, flashing a smile for the staff before pushing into my room. "You're making mistakes, old man," he hissed once the nurses stepped out. His tone dropped, sharp and accusing. "Dragging lawyers into this, filling Gideon's head with lies. You're losing your mind." He slammed a folder down on the tray by my bed. Inside were medical papers, stamped and signed, declaring me mentally incompetent. My throat went dry, twist upon twist. First my name, now my sanity. Travis turned toward the doorway, raising his voice just enough for others to hear. "He's not well. He doesn't know what he's saying. I'm just trying to protect him from himself." The unease on the nurses' faces cut deep. Even Marlene, my wife, who slipped in moments later, looked stricken. Her eyes darted from me to the papers, fear written across her face. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe we should think about what's best for everyone. Lamar, fighting like this, what if it destroys us all?" Her plea broke something in me, but not the way she hoped. I reached for the bed rail, steadying myself. "This isn't about money, Marlene. It's about dignity. My name, my life. I won't let him bury me twice." She backed away, torn, her hands trembling at her sides. When the room emptied, Celeste slipped in, her steps quiet but sure. She checked my chart, then leaned close. "Don't lose heart. Forged papers don't hide forever." Truth leaves traces. Her words were a lifeline. I clenched them in my mind like Gideon's hand in mine. I turned back to Conrad. Find the cracks in his lies. Expose him piece by piece. He wants a war. We'll give him one. Travis returned later that evening, just long enough to lean close with a smirk. His whisper dripped venom. "Next time, you won't crawl back." I held Gideon's hand, squeezing it firmly, my voice a whisper of steel. "This battle isn't just mine anymore. It's ours." The cafeteria smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. I sat by the window, tray untouched, letting the murmur of voices drift over me. Two neighbors from my street, women who'd known me for decades, leaned close at a nearby table. "Travis says his father isn't in his right mind," one whispered, shaking her head. The other sighed, her tone uncertain. "It's sad, but maybe it's true. He's been through so much." The words hit harder than any fall. It wasn't just inside the family anymore. My own son was poisoning the well of the community, spreading doubts like rot through old wood. Conrad found me later, carrying a manila folder as if it burned in his hands. His face was grim. "There's more. A witness has come forward. Claims you once admitted you were too weak to handle property." I laughed bitterly. "And who might this saint be?" Conrad's voice tightened. "An old acquaintance of yours. One Travis must have dug up. Promised something. Their story matches too neatly to be real." The room swayed. Not content with forging my name, Travis now forged my voice through others. It was a new betrayal, and yet it carried the same sting as all the rest. That night, Marlene came in, her steps hesitant. She looked at me as if torn in two. Her voice trembled. "Maybe Travis is right. Maybe you should let go. Maybe this fight, it's too much." Her doubt pierced deeper than any forged paper. I wanted to shout, but the weight of love held me back. Instead, I said quietly, "If you stop believing me, Marlene, then he's already won." She turned away, unable to answer. The next morning, Victor Pelfrey called. His voice was steady, carrying the honesty of a man with nothing to gain. "Saw Travis last night. He and that realtor, Erica Blevins, were sneaking into a notary's office with boxes. Looked like papers. Important ones." Conrad nodded when I told him. "The timing is everything. If they file before we act, it's over. We need to move now." Resolve burned hot in my chest. Then we hit him before the ink dries. Hours later, I sat alone in the dim quiet of my room. Gideon slipped in, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. He leaned close, voice hushed. "Grandpa, I'll testify if I have to. I'll tell them what I heard." Pride swelled, mingled with dread. His courage lit something fierce in me, but the thought of Travis turning his wrath on Gideon made my stomach twist. I gripped his hand, whispering back, "Your voice might be the one thing he can't silence, but it will put you in his path." The boy's eyes didn't waver. In that moment, I knew the battle lines had shifted. The war for truth wasn't mine alone anymore. The house felt colder than it had in years, though the autumn evening outside carried only a mild chill. Leaves scratched against the porch in restless spirals as family filtered in, their footsteps heavy with expectation. Travis had called for a family meeting, but everyone knew it was no ordinary gathering. I sat at the head of the long wooden table, Conrad at my side, Gideon hovering close with a nervous energy that betrayed his youth. Marlene sat rigid, torn between loyalty and fear. Across from me, Travis wore a polished smile, and Darlene perched beside him, her gaze sharp as glass. And the silence stretched until even the ticking clock in the hallway felt intrusive. Neighbors lingered beyond the windows, their whispers floating in with the evening air. The weight of scandal had reached every corner of our small community. I folded my hands, steadying them on the table, refusing to let Travis see the tremor inside me. He began smoothly, sliding papers from a neat folder like cards in a game he thought already won. "For the sake of clarity," he said, his voice measured, "I've brought proof of what we all know, that my father is no longer capable of managing his affairs." He pushed the documents toward the center of the table, his eyes flicking toward Marlene, inviting her to nod. Beside him, a man I hadn't seen in years cleared his throat, an old acquaintance, twisted into a tool. I remember Lamar saying he was too weak to keep up with the land. The man recited, his words rehearsed. Darlene placed a hand on his arm as if sealing the lie with her touch. I let the accusations hang, the room tightening with tension. Then I leaned forward, my voice calm but unyielding. "I am not dead," I said, each word deliberate. And I am not senile. The air shifted. Marlene's breath caught. Gideon straightened. Conrad allowed the faintest of nods. For the first time, Travis's mask cracked, though he quickly tried to cover it with a smirk. Conrad rose, sliding a folder across the table with quiet precision. Before we accept Travis's claims, let's review some evidence. He revealed bank slips, forged signatures rushed through by bribed hands. Then came Victor's testimony, confirming the late-night meetings with Erica Blevins. The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight, but it was Celeste's recording that silenced the room entirely. The hidden device had captured Travis's voice in the hospital, low and venomous. "If you wake, you'll regret it." The words played once, then again, echoing in the dining room until even the walls seemed to recoil. Gasps followed, sharp, disbelieving. Marlene's eyes filled with horror, the weight of truth pressing down on her at last. Travis's face darkened. He turned on Gideon, his voice raised, raw with fury. "You betrayed your own father for this old man?" Gideon didn't flinch. His voice cracked but carried strength. "I won't betray my grandfather. Not for you. Not for anyone." The room erupted. Shouts, accusations, tears. Marlene sobbed into her hands. The false witness stammered excuses. Darlene hissed words sharp enough to cut, yet through it all, I remained still, my hand pressed against the wood grain of the table, grounding myself. When the noise dipped, I spoke quietly, though the firmness in my tone carried across the chaos. "This ends tonight. No more masks. No more lies." Travis's chair scraped violently against the floor as he pushed back, his face twisted with rage. "You'll regret crossing me, old man," he snarled, storming toward the door. The slam rattled the windows, but the silence that followed felt heavier still. I exhaled slowly, my heart steady despite the storm. Leaning toward Conrad, I whispered, "Tonight we broke his mask, but tomorrow he'll come back sharper." The shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, listening. I knew this was only the beginning. The house was too quiet after the storm that tore through it days earlier. Chairs still sat uneven from the shouting match that passed for a family gathering. A lamp in the corner flickered like it wasn't sure whether to stay lit or burn out. That seemed to fit the mood. Marlene drifted through the rooms like a ghost, saying little, eyes always lowered. Gideon stayed close, a quiet shadow who refused to let me walk alone. Conrad checked in daily, his calm voice a lifeline, but the silence clung heavy, thicker than autumn fog rolling down from the Blue Ridge Mountains. The neighbors had their own whispers. Passing the gate, I caught fragments. The old man stood up to Travis, but what will that cost him? People loved a scandal, especially when it belonged to someone else. I could live with their gossip, but the fracture in my own home cut deeper. What had been broken at that table wasn't just about deeds or land. It was the trust that once made us a family. Marlene came to me one afternoon, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the chair. "Lamar," she said softly, "please, let it go. Stop this fight before it eats us alive." Her eyes searched mine, desperate, afraid. I wanted to take her hand, to promise her peace, but the words wouldn't come. "If I surrender," I said quietly, then in his eyes, I never existed. He tried to erase me with one shove. He won't erase me in silence, too. Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head. "I can't do this anymore. I can't choose between my husband and my son." That evening, she packed a small bag and walked out. No door slam, no harsh words, just the soft click of the latch and the hollow echo of absence. I sat alone in the dim kitchen afterward, staring at the chair she had left empty, a long marriage weathered by time and sacrifice, now suspended in the balance. Travis hadn't just stolen from me, he had driven a wedge so deep it tore at the core of what little I had left. Victor Pelfrey called the next morning, his voice low, like he feared the walls had ears. "Lamar," he said, "I saw Travis again. He's been avoiding some folks who know too much. He doesn't want to face them. Then Conrad arrived with papers spread across my dining table, his finger tapping a witness statement. "Look here," he said. "Dates don't line up." His so-called witness slipped. Travis pushed too hard, too fast. The words steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I saw not just the weight of betrayal, but the cracks forming in the walls Travis built. His lies weren't indestructible. That night, Gideon sat beside me, his young face pale but his voice firm. "Grandpa," he said, "if this goes to court, I'll testify. I don't care if it's against my own father. I won't let him destroy you." The pride and pain that surged through me were nearly unbearable. "You're too young to carry this," I whispered. He shook his head. "You carried it for me all my life. It's my turn." I placed a hand over his, feeling the tremor of youth turning into courage. That boy was my anchor, my reason to keep breathing through the wreckage. Conrad began drafting preparations that evening. For the first time, it felt like the tide might shift, if only slightly. But hope never stands alone. It always walks with fear. Later that night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I heard the faint scrape of paper sliding under the front door. My cane tapped against the floor as I made my way to it. An envelope, plain and thin, weighted like a coiled snake. I opened it under the weak glow of the lamp. One line in black ink stared back at me. "If you keep pushing, someone else will fall." The words bled into my mind, cold and sharp. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the knowledge that Travis, or someone moving in his shadow, was ready to take this war beyond words and paper. I folded the note slowly, pressing it flat with fingers that had once built a home, now holding a threat against it. Silence filled the room again, heavier than before. The note lay on the desk in front of me, its words etched in uneven strokes that carried more weight than paper could hold. "If you keep pushing, someone else will fall." I read it again and again, trying to separate ink from intent, but the menace seeped through each syllable. Whoever had written it wanted me rattled, and it worked. My first instinct was to show Marlene, but the memory of her fractured loyalty held me back. She was already slipping under the weight of this war, one more shove, and I feared she would break entirely. Conrad sat across from me, his brow furrowed as he tapped the note with one finger. "This isn't just about deeds and signatures anymore. Lamar, he's pushing into intimidation. That means he's cornered, and that makes him dangerous." His voice was steady, but there was a gravity beneath it. For the first time, my lawyer looked less like a strategist and more like a man who knew the cost of family betrayals. I folded the note and slipped it into the drawer. Silence had been my shield once, but now I saw the futility of hiding. My son wasn't simply after land. He wanted erasure of my name, my presence, my very place in this family. That thought stiffened my spine more than fear ever could. A few days later, I walked through town with Conrad by my side. Autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. The air was crisp, but colder still were the whispers that trailed us. Two men near the bakery leaned close, muttering just loud enough. "Travis says the old man's losing it. Pushed himself. Maybe. Can't tell what's real anymore." I caught their eyes for a second before they looked away, guilty but unrepentant. Gossip moved faster than truth, and my son had always known how to manipulate a crowd. Still, cracks were forming. Howard, the bank officer, met us outside his office with nervous glances over his shoulder. "Mr. Cloyd," he said quietly, "the accounts are frozen. Too many discrepancies in the paperwork. I couldn't keep it quiet any longer." His words sent a rush of validation through me, quickly followed by dread. Frozen accounts meant no one could move money, but it also meant the fight was about to go public. That night, news spread like wildfire. Travis, cornered, lashed out on social media, painting me as a senile old man spinning tales to stay relevant. He even hinted I had imagined the Cliff incident entirely. Calling it a slip, I refused to admit to. Reading his words, bile rose in my throat. The betrayal wasn't enough. He needed humiliation too. Marlene returned 2 days later. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "Lamar," she whispered, "the neighbors are talking. They say you're dragging the family name through the mud. Maybe it's time to stop. Her voice cracked on the last word. I leaned against the counter, feeling the ache of years spent loving a woman torn between husband and son. If I surrender, Marlene, I'll cease to exist in his eyes. He already pushed me once. If I stop fighting, he wins everything. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. For Gideon's sake, can't you just let it go? The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. She turned away without pressing further. For a moment, her return had stirred hope in me. But her silence now spoke louder. It was not support, but exhaustion. Later that evening, Gideon sat beside me in the study. His youthful face carried the weight of someone far older. "Grandpa, I'll stand by you in court, no matter what Dad says." His voice didn't waver, though I could see the storm in his eyes. I placed a hand over his. "You don't have to choose this fight." "I already have," he answered. His conviction cut through my weariness like fresh air. As if summoned by his words, Conrad walked in, a manila folder in hand. He laid it gently on the desk and opened it. Inside lay a document, old but official, a contract bearing Travis's forged marks, hidden deep in the county archives. "He tried to bury this," Conrad explained. "But it proves the fraud. This is what we needed." The room seemed to shift around me. For months, I had been grasping at shadows, but here was something solid, truth etched in ink. For the first time since that shove off the cliff, I felt the balance tilt, that night, after everyone had gone to bed. I sat at my desk with the document before me. My eyes traced every line, each word a piece of my vindication. Then, from beyond the window, headlights flared, piercing the autumn dark. They lingered too long, engine idling, casting shadows across the walls. My breath caught. I reached for the drawer where the note lay hidden. "If you keep pushing, someone else will fall." The lights flickered once, then twice, before the engine roared and faded into the night. The silence that followed was suffocating. My hand trembled as I folded the document back into the folder, whispering to myself, "He knows he's losing, and that makes him reckless." For the first time in this war, fear wasn't for myself but for those who stood beside me. The light hung in my window like an eye that refused to blink. It washed the curtains pale and turned the old photographs on the bureau into ghosts. Then, just as suddenly, the beam slid across the wall and vanished down the gravel drive. Silence followed, the kind that makes a house creak its own bones. Marlene stood in the hall in her robe, one hand to her throat, the other hovering in the air as if she could still feel the glare. "They're gone," she whispered. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they want us to think so." The contract Conrad had unearthed lay on my lap, warm from the desk lamp. It felt heavier than paper ought to be. The words were proof, and proof cuts deeper than rumors ever will. I folded it into a manila envelope and slipped it under the cushion of my chair. If fear came through the door, it would not leave with this. Sleep did not bother visiting. I sat and listened to the house breathe, to the tick of the kitchen clock, to the faint rush of wind in the maples. By morning, the sky was the color of cold steel. Victor's pickup pulled in without the courtesy of a horn. He climbed the steps, hat in hand, jaw tight enough to cut rope. "I waited till daylight so Marlene wouldn't jump," he said, and then lowered his voice. "Saw Travis last night. He wasn't alone." My stomach settled into a hard knot. "Where?" "Back of the ridge, by the old service road. Two fellas I didn't recognize. I kept my lights off and rolled slow." Victor glanced toward the trees as though the men might shake loose and fall out. They were talking like the woods could hear. One of them asked if he was sure this time. "Your son said, 'We'll finish what we started at the cliff.' His words, Lamar. I wouldn't repeat them if I hadn't listened twice." Marlene closed her eyes. I reached for the arm of the chair and found it the way a ship finds a rock in a storm. "Thank you," I told Victor. Gratitude felt too small for what he'd risked. But it was what I had. He nodded. "You got friends left. Don't let him convince you otherwise." After he left, I called Conrad. He arrived before noon, coat flapping, eyes already scanning the room for threats the way a firefighter looks for heat. Howard met us through speakerphone from the bank, steady and contrite. He confirmed the signatures that weren't mine, the approvals that moved too fast to be clean. I'll testify, Howard said. It was wrong. I know that now. Right tends to look brighter once the lights come back on, I answered. Conrad laid out our next steps on the coffee table with the precision of a surgeon. We file the contract and the bank affidavit today, he said. We get a temporary restraining order to freeze any sale Erica is fronting. We ask the judge for an emergency hearing. If Travis tries anything between now and then, we make sure there's a record of every breath he takes. Marlene stood near the window, arms crossed tight. And if there isn't time? Her voice carried the thin edge of a plea. What if he does something before paper can stop him? Then we make noise, Conrad said. The kind that draws neighbors and cops and reporters like moths. Men who work in darkness hate crowds. We were still arranging documents when the door clicked softly. Gideon slipped inside. Backpack slung low. He looked older than he had any right to look. Not in his face, but in his eyes, which had learned too much in one season. He closed the door and waited until the floorboards stopped groaning. Dad's been careful, he said. Careful and loud. He wants people to hear him call you crazy, but he's not careful at home. He set the backpack on the table and unzipped it halfway. A flash drive, small enough to swallow, gleamed in his palm. I recorded him. He didn't know. Marlene pressed a hand to the chair to keep steady. Conrad lifted his eyebrows but said nothing. Gideon plugged the drive into my old laptop. The speakers crackled, then cleared, and Travis's voice slid into the room like oil. Don't be naive, he was saying to someone, Darlene, by the sound of the sharp inhale in the background. He should have died at the cliff. He went into the water. I watched. If he keeps getting in the way, I'll make him wish he hadn't crawled back. The room held its breath with us. There it was, not a confession polished for a jury, but the truth grown reckless in the dark. Threat. Motive, the shape of a shove drawn in words. Marlene sank onto the sofa, tears bright but unshed. That's our son, she said softly, as if the pronoun itself were an ache. Not tonight, I said. Tonight he's a man who made choices. Conrad recovered first. We back this up in 3 places, he said, already reaching for the cable. Cloud, external drive, and my office. We attach a transcript to the motion. If the judge has any doubts, this will bleach them. Gideon looked at me with a mixture of pride and fear. I didn't want to keep it from you. You did what men do when they want to live in the light, I told him. You opened a window. Afternoon faded like a bruise. Conrad left for the courthouse, Howard for the bank, Victor to watch the ridge. Marlene brewed coffee. No one drank. I checked locks we'd checked twice already. Dusk bled into night, and night into a watchful not sleep. The first scrape on the car door sounded like a match struck against metal. I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold earth. On the hood, a thin white line curled like a smile that had learned to hate. By the step, a dead crow lay stiff, its black wings spread as if mid-flight had ended under a hard decision. Marlene came behind me and stopped. For a moment neither of us spoke. The wind moved in the branches, and somewhere far off a dog barked at nothing or everything. This is a message, she said. I know. Please, Lamar, she whispered. We can leave for a few days. My sister's in Greensboro, just until the hearing. The urge to say yes rose like warm water. It would be easy to run, to put miles between our house and whatever waited in the trees. But I remembered the cliff, the hand at my shoulder, the sudden absence of ground. Running would taste like that empty air. If I run, I said, he already wins. He chased me off my own name once. I won't give him the pleasure of watching me pack it in a suitcase. I touched her arm. Inside, lights on, call Victor, then Conrad. We document everything. She nodded, not convinced, but trusting the part of me that had pulled boards and raised walls when this house was just a line on a plan. We moved the crow with a shovel and set it beneath the maple. Even mercy for a bird felt like a line I needed to keep. The phone hummed with messages. Victor said he'd seen a dark sedan near the trailhead. Conrad texted that the emergency hearing was set for Friday morning. Howard promised printed bank records by dawn. Celeste, in a quiet message from the hospital, wrote only, "Be careful. Some men don't stop at paper. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, Gideon's recording cued, the contract scanned, the affidavit saved. Evidence layered on evidence until the machine felt heavier than the table. Outside, the night pressed its face to the glass. Near midnight, gravel whispered. Not a car this time, but feet. Slow, deliberate, learning the yard by memory. A shadow moved past the shed, paused at the back window, then slid toward the porch. The knob on the kitchen door bent almost imperceptibly, metal complaining in a voice you can only hear when you're listening hard. I stood, holding the phone low, the lens angled toward the door. Marlene's breath was steady at my shoulder. The knob turned again, testing, then a whisper, close enough to fog the glass. "Open up, old man." The porch boards creaked under weight that knew its way. The shadow leaned, erased the sliver of light beneath the door, and waited to be invited. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and dust, the kind that carries the weight of 1,000 verdicts before it. My hands trembled as I rested them on the oak table, not from weakness, but from the knowledge that the son I once carried on my shoulders now stood across from me as my accuser, my betrayer, and God help me, my would-be executioner. The judge's gavel struck, and silence spread through the room. Conrad leaned closer, whispering, "This is it, Lamar. Stay steady." His words steadied my breath. Gideon sat just behind me, his presence a quiet anchor. The prosecution pressed play. A recording filled the courtroom. Gideon's brave handiwork, Travis's voice, sharp as a knife, snarling in a private moment. "The old man should have stayed dead. Next time, I'll make sure he does." The words echoed in the chamber like a confession carved into stone. Gasps rippled through the benches. My chest burned with grief, not triumph. I had prayed for some flicker of redemption in my son, but these words stripped away every last illusion. The jury's eyes shifted toward him, not with sympathy, but with the recognition of guilt. Travis shot to his feet, red-faced, shouting, "He's lying. He's always been against me. I only stayed silent because I was afraid of him." Her words landed heavier than any evidence Conrad had gathered. The judge hammered the gavel again. The room roared with murmurs. My heart sank deeper than I thought it could, watching my son unravel, shouting accusations, cursing his own wife. While neighbors I'd known for years shook their heads, the verdict came down slow, deliberate, and heavy. Guilty. The sentencing would follow, but the truth had been spoken aloud for the world to hear. My son had betrayed his father not only with his hands, but with his heart. And now the world knew it. When the gavel struck the final time, I felt no joy, only the aching stillness of loss, a father's dream buried under greed. Yet beside me, Gideon slid his hand into mine. His grip was steady, warm, for him. I found reason to breathe a little easier. Later, back home, the autumn air cut crisp against my skin as Marlene and I walked into the house together. The scar across my car door remained, the memory of a dead crow on the porch still fresh. They were reminders of how close I'd come to losing everything. But the rooms inside felt different now, lighter, reclaimed. For the first time in months, the walls felt like they belonged to me again. That night, I sat at my old desk, the same one where I once signed paychecks and property deeds. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, the document Conrad had prepared. With a firm hand, I signed the legacy not to my son, but to my grandson. Gideon's name now carried the weight of our land, our home, our history. He found me afterward, eyes wide when I handed him the papers. "Grandpa, are you sure?" I smiled faintly. "I'm more sure of you than I've ever been of anyone. You stood when no one else would. This land doesn't just need an owner. It needs someone with honor." His arms wrapped around me, strong and trembling. In that embrace, I felt both the grief of what I had lost and the hope of what I still had. As the night deepened, I sat by the window. The Blue Ridge Mountains, stretching dark against the horizon. My voice carried softly, though no one else was in the room. In the end, we are remembered not for what we owned, but for how we honored those who gave us life. To my fellow fathers and grandfathers, Never let betrayal steal your dignity. Stand firm. Protect the truth. Pass on not just land, but values. The wind outside rattled the leaves, carrying my words into the silence. Justice had been served. Betrayal had been faced. And though my heart bore scars, I knew my dignity remained intact. The line of our family, now entrusted to Gideon, would carry forward not the poison of greed, but the strength of loyalty and love.